So, first of all is going to be, you're going to have to change your diet. And that diet means is that you need at least 80% to be plant-based. You really need a plant-based diet. Now, plant-based doesn't mean that I'm going to have fish and chips, and so 80% of that plate's going to be covered with chips, and 20% of that plate's covered with fish, and so now I have a plant-based diet. Even though we might like to do that. Yeah, of course. Remember, older people who are older than I am, grew up in an environment that's different than the generation growing up today. Any of you that were born before 1980 did not grow up in a glyphosate environment. You did not grow up in a genetically engineered environment. And the most important time for development of determining what kinds of adult diseases you're going to have is that time of pregnancy and gestation through puberty. And so we have elderly people today living very long lives and in reasonable shape. The fastest growing cancer rates are in children today. So just because you may be 60 or 70 years of age and you eat a crappy diet and you're still kicking along pretty well has nothing to do with whether or not that is an appropriate diet, or certainly is it appropriate for today's generation. But the problem is that now that junk diet was started from gestation on, and highly contaminated with glyphosate and other problems. So we need to get back to an 80% plant-based diet. And a plant-based diet means you need to have a great variety. You should have at least a dozen to 24 different plants per day. Now you talk to Paul Detloff, and if you leave a cow to her own out in the bush, she will eat at least 100 different species of plants every day. If left to her own devices, she will eat at least 100 different plants every day. The problem is that when we put cattle out in pastures today, how many different species do we give them? One. We put them out in a ryegrass pasture, and we think that they should be healthy. So we're about 1% of what we should be there. So most of you, when we say a plant-based diet, you think, oh, okay, well, I'll have a few chips and maybe a tomato, and maybe I'll have a little bit of lettuce. Great. So what about the other dozen? And so understand what I have found, at least most Australians have better salads than what we do in the States. So you do at least have a little bit more variety than we do up there. But what I've seen over the past 20 years is I've seen the upswing of junk food establishments. So more McDonald's, more Domino's pizzas, KFCs, now on every corner. I didn't see that 20 years ago. We saw McDonald's 20 years ago, of course, but we didn't see all these other fast food joints on every corner. And now I do see that here in Australia. So that is one thing I've recognized in the past 20 years of coming here, and the change in your dietary programs. And so there's not very many plants in those systems. And it's kind of comical. I'll hear people say that, oh, well, I eat my steak, and so I get my grass every day. I get my veggies every day through my steak. Yeah, well, have fun on the operating table. Have fun on the operating table. It's amazing to me how many people want to just kind of joke about it. They think that's funny until they have a heart attack. Then we'll see how funny it is. Yeah. When they stick that tube up your groin and up into your heart and decide, oh my goodness, you're going to have bypass surgery here. And it's gotten to be just commonplace. Have your chest cracked. They take a saw and cut you down through here and open up your chest. That's what they do for bypass surgery. And so you've clogged your vessels, and so they're going to bypass 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them. What about all the other thousands of vessels in the rest of your body? How do you think they are looking? So some people think, okay, we'll just get bypass surgery. Oh, that's fine. And so for those people, I don't need to be talking to you. That's fine. What we're going to talk about is those people who actually either want to prevent having to go to bypass surgery or who would like to reverse that before they get to that point. They may have hypertension, high blood pressure. They may have a little bit of angina. They may have a little bit of claudication, which means you have pain in the legs every time you walk any distance. You may have a little bit of exertional dyspnea, which means you have shortness of breath the further you walk, because you're starting to have cardiovascular disease. And yes, it is slow. It's like putting the frog in the pan and slowly raising the temperature. Pretty soon, bang, he's dead. That's the way cardiovascular disease progresses. It starts in infancy. So we need to have an 80% plant-based diet. And those plants, they need to be non-GMO. And you need to have at least 12 to 25 different varieties every day of different plants that you're going to get into the system. And that needs to be 80% of your diet. You need to cut back on meat. And I know that's not very good. The meat farmers don't like to hear that. That's fine. I'm just telling you what I observe. And it doesn't matter whether it's grass-fed or otherwise, so you cut back. So, because you need to eat more plants. You need to eat more plants. If you look at the centurions, there's only one society really that has the actual birth records to prove they're centurions, and that's Okinawa. Only one. Yeah, I know about the Western A. Price Foundation, and I know about the stuff that Price did and whatever. None of the people that he worked with had actual records to prove how old they got. Only the Okinawans have kept records since the 1800s on how old these people truly are. And they have the highest rate of centurions in the world. Well, how do those people eat? Are they vegetarians? No, not necessarily. But they eat very little meat. And most of what they eat is fish or seaweed. Or seafood. And they have a huge variety of vegetables every day. They don't overeat. They're active. They walk. And they have a spiritual life every day. That's the highest rate of centurions. They have the lowest rates of cancers, heart disease, diabetes, and any chronic diseases. So, you want to argue with me? I don't care. I'm not here to argue. There's a book out by Caldwell Esselstyn. He was a surgeon a thoracic surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is considered one of the top heart centers in the world. He proved that he could completely reverse, proven with catheterization, cardiovascular disease with diet. The problem is not very many Americans like the diet that he talks about. So, he didn't ask them if they liked it. What he asked them is, do you want to reverse your cardiovascular disease? And here's what you need to do in order to do that. That may not be politically correct. It may not be culturally correct. That isn't what he asked. How do you reverse cardiovascular disease? Which is still the number one killer around the world. It's now become also the number one killer next to cancer. Actually now cancer in the United States is surpassing cardiovascular disease. But even now in the developing world, cardiovascular disease, because they've brought in McDonald's and those kinds of things, junk food. So cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer around the world.